Welcome to the Now podcast, episode 11. My name is Marlon. I'm Amy Sign Capsules talk about dissipated news in the UK, express stories and give a local opinion. To the news I serve after dissipated news, several people news affects our lives. It's still underreported, and Germany, as many of us already know, we are underrepresented in the media. So then this podcast is an effort to try and address the facts. So without further ado, first story comes from the BBC. Headline is Court simplifies disability benefit system. Access to Scotland's adult disability benefits should be made easier despite forecasts of a steep increase in return costs. An independent review has said. Report issued by ministers said the adult disability payment was a great foundation which was significantly more compassionate. The benefits on offer in the rest of the UK. However, it said too many disabled people still found the system difficult to navigate and said eligibility criteria should be reviewed. As it stands, the number of people claiming the payment is forecast to grow from 279,000 in 24-25 to 703,000 in 2030-31. The cost is set to increase to over 5.4 billion per year. The price Scottish Ministers say they are willing to pay to have a more generous system. The Adult Disability Payment (ADP) was introduced in 2022, a cornerstone of this evolved social security agency which was being set up. So regular payment to help people for the added costs of having a disability or long-term health condition, regardless of whether or not they're in work or not. It is essentially a replacement for the personal independence payment. And 91% of cases have now been transferred from the Department of Work and Pensions to review to Social Security Scotland. The actual payments handed out are the same speed as standard weekly awards for total living costs of £73, or an enhanced award of £110.40. The review conducted by Edo Harris, who read letter number of 30 and care organisations, said the Scottish approach to assessments was significantly more compassionate than the WB system every place. She said it was kind of in tone and more dignified approach. And indeed, fully a third of people now getting ADP are new applicants who had not been in the seat of either people or disability leave enhanced DLA. This is only set to grow. The number of people receiving ADP is forecast to surpass 700,000. At the end of the decade, that is more than 12% of the Scottish population. Perhaps that is not such a large number when last census suggested 24% of Scots had some disability or long-term health problem limiting their day-to-day activities. As with the huge financial outlay, the total spending on social security in Scotland was 5.3 billion in 2023-24, which is forecast to hit 7.7 billion next year and 9.4 billion by 2030-31. ADP is by far the biggest element of that figure. By 2030, it will cost 2030-31, it will cost 1.4 billion. Context, that is more than 10 times the price of Scottish child payment and more than 30 times the Scottish version of the winter fuel payment. And the gap between the increasing cost of these benefits and the funding available in the block grant from Westminster is growing too. By the end of the decade, it will hit 2 billion. Money that Scottish ministers will need to find elsewhere in budgets by going for the departments or by raising taxes. The service is keen for new applicants to continue to come forward to cruise up the costs. The board states that there is evidence for the economic value of the wellbeing impacts on disability benefits and these significantly outweigh the financial costs associated with administering them. She says that not only should we continue to encourage people to apply for adult disability payment, but we also need to make the application process as accessible as anxiety reduced as possible. What notes 50 recommendations about simplifying the system and making it easy for people to navigate. It also argues that HPT for the payment should be based on the real life experiences of clients and not just on a list of activities. Present HPT is based on specific things people might need help for, with examples including preparing food, eating and drinking, washing and behaving, get interesting communication verbally. Some respondents don't do it for you. Haven't take the time to highlight issues, and what you can't do is depression, demoralising and unfair, and that it feels like you're having to beg for help. Just as is recommended. Moving forward, the system is a bigger picture approach based on outcomes and equal participation society. The Scottish Government says it will consider the report and set out its formal response in January 2026. In many ways, they are sinking from the same injury already. The UK government was endeavouring to restrict LGBT speech payments only to perform a series of claim stands due to backbench revolts. Scottish ministers were very clear that they would not be making any cuts. Social Security Justice Secretary Shirley-Ann Summerfield has stated that she sees benefits and investment in the people of Scotland. Indeed, the language is actually written into the legislation underpinning Social Security Scotland, underlines a very different approach taken by Scottish and UK administrations. However, which are faced with supporting bill for working age benefits. At a time of tight budgets and weak growth, the UK government has sought to bring the number of claimants and thus the cost of welfare down while maintaining Champions' fiscal rules against increasing personal taxes on state body. Scottish minister must warned that must be popular, particularly with those receiving the payments, but we should not pretend it was an easy choice to make. It's been funded by high taxes, but the Scottish system now featuring 6 different income tax brackets, just higher earners to contribute hundreds and even thousands of pounds more per year than if they lived down the south. The latest plan to balance the books involves reducing the public sector workforce by 0.5% a year for the next 5 years. Social Security Scotland itself has then been singled out for important thing, efficiency savings, whilst health boards have also been asked to make 8% cuts. All sides based on the system as it currently stands prior to consideration of Ms. Abbott's review. It's a very interesting article, and that's in me. I was ignorant to anything to do with any difference between the Scottish system and the English system, or indeed any difference that might be with the Welsh system or London system. Not getting on the differences between. Was aware there was a different service system there that obviously devolved out in terms of the Scottish government, as has been said. I think, although it's in terms of costing, if they're going to be put in price, the decision to stick with the benefit system as it is, as it's difficult decisions, rising taxes, etc. and so forth. I think it's maybe interesting that their approach was what was highlighted as much as anything in terms of how they went about the assessment process, and think for a lot of people in terms of coming to assessments for whether it's pay or whether it's our work benefits, that is the issue. A lot of the time we say that we need the benefits in most all cases they're going to the assessments, but in terms of the way they're treated and the way the humanity of those assessments, that's been the big trigger factor in this. But then we come time, certainly for the last 14, 15 years, particularly with the welfare cuts. Never happened over the last 15 years, but the whole time really. But I think it's because the system seems to have got more draconian and more kind of challenging in the last decade and a half. It's potentially been ever before, and I think even just if the DWP, they're not going to take a leave out of Scotland, even if they did that bit, change the approach of the assessments, that would be a starting point. I mean, also, I think when I talked about this a few episodes ago, about the things that they assessed, she's highlighted in the report about the things, how the assessments go, what they assess, the criteria and so forth. It's got to be more to do with their life. There was something I'd mentioned in previous episodes that, even things that they assess for the British system is, don't see how it correlates, particularly with out of work benefits, how things that they assess for and assembly kind of give them any real clear idea on a day-to-day basis how someone would go. So that's been highlighted in these reports as well. So I think lessons won't be learned by all, but I'd argue that they should be. And I think even the approach, even if you meant that people still wouldn't necessarily getting the benefits, but even if they went through that process and it was more commercial, that in itself would be something similar to social services and assessments and stuff, and for social care, particularly for people that perhaps are looking for care in their own home. So there's a thing that, creates some massive anxieties, that the feeling of how they're treated during those assessments and the reviews, etc. and so forth. So I think approach, obviously help people want the help and people need the financial support and whatever, the support with care or whatever, but the approach to how they're viewed as human beings is just as important as how the support and the outcome of the decision of what support they get, because that sets the tone. Because even if you get the support, the way that support is delivered, if the assessment is dehumanising, then the way that support is delivered, you also feel the same pain. And even if it isn't, if you've already been made to feel as if you're not worthy, that the way you receive the support, even if it's in the best intentions, will be marred by how you were treated during the assessment. So I think it all goes hand in hand. Obviously, there's always going to be the conversation of higher taxes and whether it should go towards benefit payments or also some social care, etc. and so forth. Things. It's for another day. But, I think some lessons could be learned from Whitehall, but as I say, from the Scottish system to Whitehall, but as I say, and I don't think we're up. I think stories from the disability news service. The headline is UN asks serious questions of ministers after activists highlight discriminatory mental health bill. The UN committee has raised serious concerns at the UK government's mental health policy breach in the International Disability Rights Convention, with the legislation set to complete its passage through Parliament when MPs return from their summer holidays. The bill, based on a joint legislation drawn up by the last Conservative government, has passed almost unnoticed through the Lords, and the Commons, despite significant concerns raised by disabled campaigners, they believe it falls far short of the fundamental reforms needed to ensure human rights for disabled people, and that this will stop them being subjected to forced detention and degrading treatment. There's also been processes by autistic people and people with disabilities who believe the bill will not do enough to get them out of mental health hospitals and protect them from public hospital services that have led to cruelty, abuse and even deaths. Now, the UN's Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has written to the UK government through the UN's Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to express its concern that the bill will breach the UN Conventions of Rights of People with Disabilities, UNCRPD, if it becomes law in its present form. It has said it received credible information that indicated such concerns. The committee fears the bill will continue to allow disabled people to be detained in hospital. The basis of the mental health impairment and the provision of mental health services are not based on free and informed consent. It also questions whether disabled people and disabled people's organisations have been closely consulted and actively involved in drafting the bill. Points out they called as far as 2017 for the UK to change laws that allow non-consensual involuntary compulsory treatment and detention of disabled people based on their actual or perceived impairment, while making a similar call as to the action by the committee throws concerns raised by user-led rights-based organisation Liberation, which is run by people with mental health diagnoses. Dorothy Gold, Liberation's founder, said that she had contacted the committee because she found no one within the UK Parliament appeared willing to take notice of the concerns about the bill that had been raised by disabled people with lived experience of the areas it covers, or the government being utterly unwilling to listen. She said the Liberation repeated calls for full human rights for people experiencing acute mental distress or trauma, and autistic people of those with difficulties have been ignored, dismissed and misinterpreted. In contrast, with promising examples of genuine progress in other countries such as Mexico. The UK government appears stuck in the past, she said. God said the bill bases some outdated assumption that some people with mental health diagnoses would always need to be detained against their weak psychiatric hospitals and treated to protect them, mental health professionals and the public in general against serious risk, which pointed out that World Health Organization, the new application, had concluded there was medical research evidence that these forms of coercion prevent risk while they have to be discriminatory, and that results in serious harm where there was also alternative and better ways of handling any risks. She said, given this, the government's argument it can only give people with mental health diagnoses more voice, but before human rights held by members of the public in general falls on very weak ground. It'd be difficult, in fact, to describe the government's approach as more than continuing discrimination against people with mental health diagnoses that dominated UK politics for generation in generation out. Discrimination must end once and for all. What takes instead is legislation, which breaks away decisively from the current health-dominated model and recognises us as a whole people and ensures that we can live independently in community in the same way as anyone else. Liberation will now be submitted further evidence before the UN Committee joins the UK government of the bill in Geneva next month. It's about something I'm going to talk about a bit itself because I'm not that first in what the draft says. So, I'm not a legal expert, so I'm not going to discuss it. Particularly, I would say, is there other concerns? I'll take the board, but also views of the officials. I'll also take the board as well. And what would say about the UN citing concerns? I wonder to what extent actually governments still listen to these UN advisors because it was only a few weeks ago there were expressing concerns about the welfare reform, and they seem to affirm the trees, although they were obviously climb downs, whereas climb downs were basically toughly labor benches experienced and concentration reservoirs from campaigners and prominent BT figures. As well, there seemed to be a domino effect to whatever, saying that obviously benches from the start had basic concerns, but it seemed to amplify and ramp up as soon as the letter 100 Labour before had been published in the Guardian, and I wonder how much impact a lot of times these UN advisors kind of have on individual and nations policy, because certain terms of insurance and cuts, social welfare, just by this case, but in previous decades, they've cited things about how the conditions as well, and instead of fallen on deaf ears. So just with the question. Stories over the BBC when the headline is able to benches mankind hit screens. A short film 10 story of a record-breaking landing climb by disabled adventurer will be shown at a special screen in the next month. The film follows Nicholson from Dorchester, Northamptonshire, as he ascends. I can't say that name. Also known as Snowden. It's basically the attentive member Snowden. Sounds Welsh, but I can't attempt to pronounce it. Apologies. He's the first disabled person to climb the mountain Soda using the purpose-built auto-aid power chair. He says, "This is just my story. It's about showing what's possible when lived experience space inclusive engineering." Mr. Wilson said the film will be shown at the Royal One, Gate Theatre in Northampton on the 21st of August. Former soldier Mr. Wilson, 48, served in Northern Ireland, Kosovo, Iraq, and Afghanistan before being forced to retire with severe spinal injuries. The film, titled Project Rock Climber, explores the journeys through chronic pain and mental health struggles and our collaboration with book engineering, the creation of Climber, a prototype device designed for extreme environments. He said, "The chair saved my life, and now we want to use it to show how accessibility can be culturally friendly, the hope and ambition At the centre, screening roles support the wheelchair lines and National Campaign for Intruder Access and Disability of Disabled People. Joe Gordon, representative of the Royal and Dunkirk, said it's great to be able to support the noble work because it's doing determined accessibility subject to disabled to see or Dunkirk. Oh, congratulations to Mr. Wilson. It'd be interesting to see the documentary and also that there's the technology, the prototype, and hopefully that goes into the mobility work device. This is for prototype. Well, that product, because yet again you'll be the accessible equipment to enable disabled people to carry way outdoors, do things, make a contribution, and go up having session service. So, two characters. But I think it shows one's lived experience, showing that they've quest and that life doesn't end. Betterment nature in life, also to, something comes out of that. It's positive in terms of the technology and the accessible technology that's there. So, yeah, forward to other things to the showman. Yeah, to manage. And I find the story. It's from this new series, and the headline is Network Rail raises questions on inaccessible bridges after refusing to cooperate for access. Network Rail has been questioned again over its failure to provide funding to ensure the accessibility of new infrastructure after the plan could not afford to ensure a new footbridge would be accessible to people with mobility impairments. It will link new housing developments alongside of the railway line in the Kennington area region. Two developments side funding labour for in exchange for planning permission for their developments is only enough for a steep region. Not the ramped version that Rivers has secured grant permission for the bridge, which will be built by Network Rail, will replace a level crossing that has been deemed unsafe because of the great number of people not expecting to use it. Access campaigner Doug Orley has told Kent to County Council where you will seek judicial review if it does not meet his equality act duties and oppose Network Rail's application to override the public right way from the level crossing to the new bridge. He has told the council it is unacceptable that you appear unconcerned at the diversion of public funds over step only for bridges for the sake of saving Network Rail and the developers' money. Thus, banking in inaccessibility for decades to come. Corley himself, a wheelchair user, said he found Network Rail's failure to provide the necessary funding to be family offensive. Previously provided significant loan despite a Network Rail to withdraw plans to build an inaccessible bridge at Coplandville, New York, which again would have seen a dangerous level crossing replaced by a footbridge that could only be reached by steps rather than maps. Network Rail this week provided some excuses for not providing the funding as they ensure the bridge was accessible. Or reasons. I'm reading from sources. It needs to send 10 excuses. Obviously. Partiality. Use the term. Isn't. So a disputed news service that the bridge was being funded by private developers and the Network Rail was not funded to make up the shortfall. It claimed it only had funds for renewals of old bridges and not for enhancements such as replacing for crossing the bridge, which was meant that Kennington West was outside the railway's fleet in the meadow. It also said that the funding envelope of the railway has been hit by the same inflation as the developers. And it said the Network Rail Diversity Impact Assessment had found that a stepped footbridge was the right option. Christine Link, consultant advisor in accessibility and also wheelchair using, wrote this week about the Kennington Bridge plant Network Rail. And Network Rail's recent track record of building footbridges across the UK and exclude disabled people entirely, which she said was an embroiling contradiction with promise of accessibility and quality. She wrote, Network Rail's reliance on cost savings all the time as well as the claim of future upgrades, mods and dead wide lips will be like seeming accessibility for decades. It tells disabled people they are not only to be accommodated if front buckles here or pressure maps. She I did research. Consistently shows that truly accessible infrastructures deliver significant health, environmental and mobility benefits, reducing congestion and boosting local economies for all. One of the developers in the site suggests an accessibility strategy is groundbreaking and will provide a template for the railway network in other parts of the country, therefore due to require replacement to all the safety existing level crossings, of course. So they will grow the developers call it State and Barrett Bedville and Ashford Council are all held by noon to say how much extra accessible first. The budget cost. Obviously that's the article saying that obviously that that's for response. Was a response. Again, this discussion in this episodes about when they work out what they should deal with their own technique. They can't even ensure that their passengers can go off and train in a dignified manner then. It's hardly surprising, but I think the biggest beef for me is population and an increasing health issues. So in my mind, accessibility just makes sense. Going days is and it's estimated to 11 million of the population, and that's, a fraction of the population that in terms of it's seen as far as to say with people, but that's only increasing, and the population is increasing, and that trend is not gonna change, and so to me it makes clear sense to add in accessibility into your thinking and to price it in. And if you can't price it in these kind of infrastructure projects, you either can afford them or you can't. If you can't afford the accessibility that contributes to them, it makes no sense, because if you're not just it's excluding the young person and with mobility impairments, there's a whole elderly population, a part of that equation as well. So that figure's increase. So it's, I don't understand this fight against accessibility really. It's, it's only becoming increasingly apparent in this data. So it should be indexed into any kind of infrastructure projects for communities really. It's after. And that goes to housing as well, wherever possible. Or particular types of housing. To me, it's just fighting against something that eventually will become ever more commonplace. Anyway, thanks for listening. See you next episode.